Bonjour. Où est la discothèque? Bibliothèque? That's about as far as I can go, uh, asking where the disco is in France, which is valuable information if you are an amazing dancer like I am. Anyway, around 4:30 a.m. this morning, I wake up to screaming kid who threw up all over his bed several times. So I'm at home, probably cleaning up vomit chunks today. So I popped over to Paris to record you a little lecture talking about the 3 chapters we read. So I'm going to be using this version just because that's the one I got. So if you have that, you can follow along. Otherwise, I can at least kind of give you a ballpark idea what chapter in. So chapter 10, the leech and his patient. This is where we start to see a little bit more of Chillingsworth's method of how he goes about kind of bothering Dimmesdale and really messing with him. So on page 121, he now dug into the poor clergyman's heart like a miner searching for gold, or rather like a sexton delving into a grave, possibly in quest of a jewel that had been buried in the dead man's bosom, but likely to find nothing save mortality and corruption. Alas for his own soul if these were what he sought. So we get a little bit of foreshadowing even to later in this chapter, because Dimmesdale and Chillingsworth are going to have that conversation about the plant that grew up out of the heart of the dead dude, and the plant represents a sin that dead dude didn't reveal and kept secret until he passed away, and then this is the after effect when he's in his grave and the plant grows up out of it. And so we get a little idea like that of, and that's what Chillingsworth is doing. It's almost like he's going through people's graves and he's just trying to pick apart everything. And so what he would do, a lot of terms describing him kind of like as a miner on page 122, as in like mining for minerals. Then, after long search into the minister's dim interior and turning over many precious materials, so he's kind of just digging through mentally what's going on with Dimmesdale, and the fine materials that he is tossing off. He sees lots of goodness in Dimmesdale. Precious materials in the shape of high aspirations for the welfare of the race, warm love of souls, pure sentiments, natural piety, strengthened by thought and study, and illuminated by revelation. All of which invaluable gold was perhaps no better than rubbish to the seeker. So he would find all these good things, and that would be gold to most people if you were mining in someone's head, which is a curious activity. But that's not what he's looking for. He's looking for the bad stuff. So he just kind of tosses all those good qualities of Dimmesdale away and keeps looking. And as Dimmesdale and Chillingsworth spend more time together, Dimmesdale does start to get a weird vibe from Chillingsworth. And he didn't trust that weird vibe because he doesn't really trust anyone. Because he's so guilt-ridden by having this secret sin, he doesn't really feel like he can trust anyone. And so, not trusting anyone, there isn't any particular lack of trust that he shows to Chillingsworth. Page 123, this is the part about the plant. And the part about the plant, I found them growing on the grave which bore no tombstone, nor other memorial of the dead man, save these ugly weeds that have taken up upon themselves to keep him in remembrance. They grew up out of his heart, and typify, it may be, some hideous secret that was buried with him, which he had done better to confess during his lifetime. So we get a couple things. One, if you remember back to the beginning of the book, it said the first 2 things that Puritan settlement made, even though this was supposed to be a utopia of human virtue, was the cemetery and the prison, right? And then we get the stuff about the rose bush. So we're getting another plant here, right? And all these things are symbolic. And so this is a different version of the rose bush, which is a sweet moral blossom and something you can take from this as long as, things get out in the open. It's generally prisoner going in or coming out, and so they've been punished and they're atoning for their sin, and so we get this. This guy didn't. And so Chillingsworth, even just by bringing this up, is hinting that he knows that there's something going on with Dimmesdale. Going on, and so through this conversation, he really tries to get him to confess. In 124, he says, "Why not reveal the secrets here?" asked Chillingsworth, glancing quietly aside at the minister. "Why should not the guilty ones sooner avail themselves of this unutterable solace?" They do, mostly. Going on down the page a little bit, and Dimmesdale says, Chillingsworth said, "Yet some men bury their secrets thus," observed the composition. "True, there are such men," answered Dimmesdale. "But not to suggest more obvious reasons, it may be that they're kept silent by the very constitution of their nature. Or can we not suppose it?" And this is kind of a messed up view, and Chillingsworth's points that he makes on this is pretty good. "Guilty as they may be, retaining nevertheless a zeal for God's glory and man's welfare, they shrink from displaying themselves black and filthy in the view of men, because thenceforth no good can be achieved by them." No evil of the past be redeemed by better service. So, to their unutterable torment, they go about among their fellow creatures looking pure as new-fallen snow, while their hearts are all speckled and spotted with iniquity of which they cannot rid themselves. And I mean, if you're looking for a thesis statement to sum up Dimsdale, that's it. Like he does really want to do good, and he wants to help people. And I mean, this could also just be weenie side of him coming out, but he's afraid that if it comes out that he did something bad, he'll never be able to do goodness again. And this is Puritanism 101. Once you're a sinner, you're a sinner. And Chillingsworth can't believe that. He said, those men deceive themselves. Would you have me believe, O wise and pious friend, that a false show can be better, can be more for God's glory or men's welfare than God's own truth? Trust me, those men deceive themselves. From here, for this conversation, Dimsdale obviously doesn't tell him. And then we cut to, they look out the window and they see Hester and Pearl walking through the graveyard, as you do. And Hester and Pearl, not Hester, Hester wouldn't be dancing on graves. Pearl was dancing on graves, which is kind of weird. And she took these little burrs after her mom told her to stop and made a letter A out of these burrs. The child probably overheard their voices, for looking up to the window with a bright and naughty smile of mirth and intelligence, she threw one of the prickly burrs at Reverend Dimsdale. She takes it off the letter and hucks it at him. Right, more symbolism. The sensitive clergyman shrunk with nervous dread from the light missile. Detecting his emotion, Pearl clapped her little hands in the most extravagant ecstasy. Hester Prynne, likewise, had involuntarily looked up. So, this is kind of awkward scene, isn't it? So we got Hester and Pearl outside, we got Dimsdale and Chillingsworth hanging out upstairs. It's got to make Hester feel weird, and certainly it's got to make Dimsdale feel weird, and Chillingsworth probably just enjoying himself. But Pearl yells up, "Come away, mother, come away, and yonder old black man will catch you. He got hold of the minister already. Come away, mother, or he'll catch you, but he cannot catch little Pearl." So first of all, a black man would be Satan, which in addition to just being a straight-up racist term to describe that, she's describing Chillingsworth as the devil. And she said, the devil already got the minister, and the devil's going to get you. Even though she doesn't really know these things, Pearl has a good intuition. I'm not sure exactly what term I would use, but she feels the vibe of things, and she recognizes Chillingsworth as a bad, sketchy dude. So then the rest of this chapter, they kind of keep talking, and finally Dimsdale kind of snaps at Chillingsworth, because Chillingsworth keeps pressing and keeps pressing and keeps pressing, and Dimsdale freaks and gets up and walks away, but then after that, he realizes that what he did was weird, and he didn't want Chillingsworth to get any more suspicious of him than he was, so he went back and apologized after. Now, at the end of chapter 10, this is one of the weirder parts in the book, and this scene will make a little bit more sense later, but Dimsdale fell asleep, reading deeply, I guess, and then fell into a really hard sleep, so deep that he couldn't feel when Chillingsworth crept into the room, opened up his shirt, and saw something. Okay, now we don't know exactly what he saw, though there'll be kind of hints at it later, so I'll kind of leave it at that. But he thinks he saw something, and he freaked. Had a man seen old Roger Chillingsworth at that moment of ecstasy, he would have had no need to ask how Satan comports himself when a precious human soul is lost to heaven and won into his kingdom. So if someone was watching Chillingsworth in the room, he said that person would know exactly what Satan does when he wins someone's soul. He'd be dancing and happy and celebrating. Except what distinguished the physician's ecstasy from Satan's was the trait of wonder in it. Chillingsworth is amazed by what he sees here. Like I said, we'll get into what he saw, and we don't know exactly from the scene, but we'll get a little bit more information. Whoa, what's happening to Paris? Paris is going away as we get further into the book. So chapter 11, we get more kind of whininess. On page 132, this is more of kind of Chillingsworth technique. Chillingsworth could play upon him as he chose. Would he arouse him in a throb of agony? The victim was forever on the rack. It needed only to know the spring that controlled the engine, and the physician knew it well. Would he startle him with sudden fear? As at waving of a magician's wand, uprose a grisly phantom, uprose 1,000 phantoms, in many shapes of death or more awful shame, all flocking round the clergyman and pointing their fingers at his breast. So Chillingsworth knew exactly how to push his buttons. And that's what he would just keep doing. Sometimes he'd make him scared, sometimes he'd make him angry, sometimes he'd make him guilty, but he's always kind of poking at him and poking at him and poking at him and poking at him. The slow torture. So one night, Dimsdale is taken to kind of punishing himself. on page 136, in Mr. Dimsdale's secret closet. I don't know why Mr. Dimsdale has a secret closet with a whip in it, which sounds fairly sketchy to me, but that's just me. I guess I'm a little Puritan in me after all. In Mr. Dimsdale's secret closet, under lock and key, there was a bloody scourge. Sometimes this Protestant and Puritan divine had plied it on his own shoulders, laughing bitterly at himself all the while, and smiting so much the more pitilessly because of that bitter laugh. So he'd whip himself and then laugh, and make himself bleed as kind of self-punishment. And he kept vigils likewise night after night, sometimes in utter darkness, sometimes with a glimmering lamp, and sometimes viewing his own face in the looking-glass by the most powerful light he could throw upon it. So he would sometimes just stay up all night and sit in the dark and think. So you can see he's really starting to lose it. That's not healthy behavior. And if you're staying up all night just thinking and you're really upset about stuff and you don't do anything about it, you're going to be pretty unhappy most of the time, and he really is. The minister's vigil is a fun scene, and in another day or two, I'll show you a couple scenes from the movie, and this scene, the minister's vigil scene, is, I do have to warn you, it's powerful. And so I'm going to have several passages written out to guidance just right from the get-go at the beginning of class, so that if the scene gets to be a little bit too, it can be overwhelming. So anyway, so late one night, Dimsdale was feeling pretty bad, and he decided he was going to go stand on the scaffold. Right. So we've started to talk a little bit about light and darkness in here, sins which are brought to light. So in the beginning of the book, Hester stands on one of the punishments is to stand on the scaffolding during the day in the sun, so her sins are all laid bare, and everyone can just kind of stare at her. Later, a minister goes to the same place in the middle of the night when no one's around, so he's doing it in the darkness or the dimness, Dimsdale. And he just starts doing weird things, like first on page 139, without any effort of his will or power to restrain himself, he shrieked aloud. So he just goes up there in the middle of the night and just yells as loud as he can without trying. Obviously, an outcry that went pealing through the night and was beaten back from one house to another and reverberated. Da-da-da. It is done, muttered the minister, covering his face with his hands. The whole town will awake and hurry forth to find me here. But it was not so. The shriek had perhaps sounded with a far greater power to his own startled ears than it actually possessed. So either he kind of hallucinated or dreamt that he screamed that loud, but apparently he didn't. So as he's up there, then he sees Father Wilson walk by. Father Wilson had been at Governor Billingham's as the minister. He's kind of helping this guy in his deathbed and comforting to him. And he yells to him, 141, "A good evening to you, venerable Father Wilson. Come up hither, I pray you, and pass a pleasant hour with me." Good heavens, had Mr. Dimsdale actually spoken? For one instant he believed that these words had passed his lips, but they were uttered only with his imagination. So he could have confessed there, but he didn't. And then, on page 143, after a little bit, he's still feeling pretty lousy, but then he hears Pearl's laughing, and he calls them up. And on page 143, "Where have you been, Hester? Whence come you, Hester?" asked the minister. What sent you hither?" "I've been watching a deathbed," answered Hester Prynne, "at Governor Winthrop's deathbed, and I've taken a measure for a robe, and I'm going homeward to my dwelling." So she, like the minister, was at this guy's deathbed. Hester, outside of not having the gig of a minister or a religious figure, I mean, she's really taken the role of a very religious person, which is fairly ironic because she's doing it because of the sin she committed. And the thing we don't really know is how religiously active she was prior to Affair. Because Affair, while not religious, she could have been spending, lots of time, as she does the rest of her life here, devoted herself to helping other people. In 143, Hester did, silently ascended the steps and stood on the platform, holding little Pearl by the hand. The minister felt for the child's other hand and took it. The moment that he did so, there came what seemed a tumultuous rush of new life. Other life than his own, pouring like a torrent into his heart and hurrying all through his veins, as if the mother and the child were communicating their vital warmth to this half-torpid system, that reformed an electric chain. So this is the way it should be. And Pearl tries to call him out on this and says, 144, "Minister," whispered little Pearl, what wouldst thou say, child?" asked Mr. Dimsdale. "Wilt thou stand here tomorrow with mother and me tomorrow noontide?" So will you stand here and hold our hands tomorrow afternoon? "No. A moment longer, my child," he said. "But wilt thou promise," asked Pearl, "to take my hand and mother's hand tomorrow noontide?" "Not then, Pearl," said the minister, "but another time." "And what other time?" persisted the child. "At the great judgment day," whispered the minister. There, then, and there before the judgment seat, thy mother and thou and I must stand together, but the daylight of this world shall not see us meeting. Pearl laughed again. Now, this is where it gets weird. As this is happening, they see a bright red light in the sky. And on page 145, it says, nothing was more common in those days than to interpret all meteoric appearances as seeing stuff in the sky and reading into the sign of God, and other natural phenomena that occurred with less regularity than the rise and set of the sun and moon, and as so many revelations of the supernatural source. Going on, this belief was a favorite one of our forefathers, as betokening that their infant commonwealth was under a celestial guardianship of peculiar intimacy and strictness. So it said this belief that you could read the signs of God and events in the sky, anything which was more rare than the sun going up and sun going down, they would read as a sign. And they particularly like to do that because they viewed as little Christian community that they have a special attention from God, and that God is, kind of winking at them. We appeared therefore solely to the defense of his own eye and heart, that the minister, looking upward to the zenith, beheld there the appearance of an immense letter, the letter A, marked out in lines of dull red light. Now, we've talked a lot about symbols and how the meaning of symbols can be variable, and that can be a positive with them, but it can also be a negative. Because on 148, people. So when the letter A comes up in the sky, we've got Hester and Pearl and Dimmesdale standing there together. So they view this as sign of adultery. Like this is God is looking down and seeing them there, and poof, it's up in the sky. But the other people, but did you hear reverence of the portent that was seen last night? A giant, great letter, red letter in the sky, the letter A, for which we interpret to stand for angel. For our good Governor Winthrop was an angel that past night. Doubtless fit he held there should be some notice thereof. So they misinterpreted it. Maybe both of them did. Maybe it didn't have anything to do with anything. It's just something that happened. But one other last thing before I wrap this up. So they bring Dimmesdale down. Dimmesdale gives a powerful sermon the next day. But as he came down from the pulpit steps, the gray-bearded sexton met him, holding up a black glove that the minister recognized as his own. It was found, said the sexton, this morning on the scaffold where evildoers are set up in public shame. Now, the logical explanation or logical question this dude should be asking is, what were you doing on the scaffold last night, or how'd your glove get here? But because ministers are chosen by God, and therefore they don't want any information that might contradict that, so they don't want to assume that he was doing something bad. So they kind of will mentally bend over backwards to keep that image of him being pure and good in their head by just saying, Satan dropped it there, I take it, intending a scurrilous jest against your reverence. But indeed, he was blind and foolish as he ever and always is. A pure hand needs no glove to cover it. So rather than just ask him, so what's with the glove up there, they said, Satan must have snuck into your house and took it to make you look bad. So all these things, whether it's people's opinion of him, people love him, they think he's a powerful speaker, they think he's an amazing preacher, they think he's a little bit of heaven down on earth, so much so that they would jump to the conclusion that Satan snuck into his house, stole the glove, put it there to make him look bad. Excuse me. So that's all I've got. So for tomorrow, I want you to read next 3 chapters. So that's 13, 14, 15. And we might watch a scene or two from the movie tomorrow. And that's it. So if you have questions, I can answer them then. And I hope to have the end of your essays done by tomorrow afternoon. So, a toodaloo!